All eyes are on Washington tonight for Donald Trump's first State of the Union address. He's promised a big and important speech, and one that will cover a lot of territory, including trade, immigration, and infrastructure. The CBC's Ellen Mauro and Paul Brandus of West Wing Reports are taking your questions on the State of the Union address here on CBC News Network and also live on YouTube and Facebook channels. And if you've got questions, send them to youtube.com/CBC News or facebook.com/CBC News. And thank you both for being out there today on a very cold day, I understand, in Washington, D.C. Ellen, let me start. Yeah, let me start with a question of my own. Who is likely to show up tonight? The president known as Twitter Trump, as you and others have called him, or the president known as teleprompter Trump?
Well, Andrew, you're always sort of hesitant to predict what you might see from President Trump, but certainly when it's come to these big occasions, we have seen more of Donald Trump sticking to the script. He gave a speech to a joint session of Congress last year that very much stuck to the script. There wasn't anything particularly controversial or off the cuff in those remarks. And the last speech we heard from the president was in Davos, Switzerland last week at the World Economic Forum, where, again, he very much stuck to the script. Now, could we see some off-the-cuff comments, some ad-libs? That, of course, is always possible. And again, I would hesitate to predict. But if I was a betting woman, I would say we'll probably more likely see teleprompter Trump tonight.
So, Paul, do you agree with that? And if you do, how much of Trump's personal hands do you think will be on this speech?
Well, I do agree in general. I think we're probably going to see teleprompter Trump here. The speech he gave before Congress last year was quite serious, quite sober. There were a few off-the-cuff remarks. In general, though, he pretty much stuck very closely to the script as prepared. And afterwards, you had even liberal Democrats, his opposition, saying Donald Trump became a president tonight. Well, that went away 2 or 3 days later when he reverted to the Twitter Trump, when that emerged and he started, tweeting all of the usual bizarre things that he does. So he's capable of both, but I think the feeling tonight is that we'll see the teleprompter Trump quite serious, quite sober. And if you talk to White House aides who have been working on the speech, it's been several weeks in progress, I think it's going to be quite serious and sober.
And Ellen, what kind of accomplishments do you think Trump is going to emphasize in his address?
Well, I think we've heard him emphasize in the past what we'll hear from him again tonight. He always talks about the strength of the economy and the stock market. Certainly, he will do that again tonight. He'll also likely tout his tax reform legislation that was passed at the end of the last year. He will talk about those accomplishments. Certainly, he'll also probably talk about accomplishments abroad. We often hear him talk about ISIS losing ground in Iraq and Syria, and I think we can expect him to do the same tonight as well.
And let me ask you this, Paul, and maybe you can help us with this. This comes from Cynthia Simonis, who asks, will he talk about the memo? Because the memo seems to be quite the chatter in Washington today.
Well, I don't believe it's going to be in the prepared remarks, but again, if we see some kind of an ad-lib comment, you never know with Donald Trump. I would not expect him to do that. If you look at history, though, Richard Nixon, a year into Watergate, came into the House and said 1 year of Watergate is enough. It's very possible that Trump, if he goes off script, could make some kind of crack about that. I would be surprised if he did. But again, this is a president who plays to his base. They think the Russia investigation is, in the president's words, a hoax. So perhaps to speak to his base, it's very possible that he could say something like that. But I'd be surprised if he did. But again, with Donald Trump, you never really know.
All right. And Alan, let me ask you this. And this comes from Annie D. She comments, so many are boycotting, and I mean the high-ups who normally go. And I think this gets to the question of what kind of reception is he likely to get from Congress and other people in the audience. And maybe, Paul, you can weigh in on that, too. Do you feel as though, are there going to be a lot of people that are not going to go because they just don't like Donald Trump?
Well, we do know of a few lawmakers, Andrew, who have already said that they are not going tonight. Several of those lawmakers are African American, and they're not going in protest of the president. And lawmakers who are coming, many of them are bringing Dreamers, DACA recipients, as their guests, as a way of keeping pressure on the president to ensure something is done for the Dreamers, those young people who were brought to the U.S. by their parents when they were children. We're also seeing some lawmakers bringing guests who have been critical of the president. For example, New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand is bringing Carmen Yulín Cruz, the mayor of San Juan, Puerto Rico, who got into a very public feud, Twitter dispute with the president after he criticized her and she criticized him after Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico. So certainly there are a number of protest actions happening surrounding the speech tonight.
Paul?
Well, I think that what we're going to see is when you see these shots of the House floor, it's going to be really very two different audiences. You'll see the Republican crowd, which will be applauding the president frequently. Then the other half of the chamber will be the Democrats, who will be sitting on their hands. They won't be applauding at all. And whoever is picking the camera shots will show close-ups of key Republicans, key Democrats, either, again, applauding wildly or ignoring what the president says. It's just a reflection of how deeply divided this country is. So I think we're going to see that. But it is true, as Ellen said, there are a handful of Democratic lawmakers, a lot of them from the what's known as the Congressional Black Caucus, who are avoiding this event. They are unhappy, disappointed, angry with what the president has said over the past year about race relations, about organizations like the Ku Klux Klan and things like that. So a fair number of them will not be here tonight.
All right, Ellen, Paul, thank you very much. We're going to leave you here, but Ellen and Paul will continue to take your questions live on our YouTube and Facebook channels. And remember, you can send your questions to youtube.com/CBC News or facebook.com/CBC News. And a reminder.
Hi everyone, thank you for continuing to watch us on Facebook and YouTube. Yep, we're already getting some comments and questions in, so we'll just continue here with Paul Brandus of West Wing Reports. Jody Marsh is commenting, he has to speak for a longer time than he's ever done before. This ought to be interesting. A YouTube viewer asks, what about NAFTA, NATO, and the UN? Will they come up? Do you think those will come up, Paul?
Well, some of the key themes in the speech tonight are going to be things like immigration and trade, for example. So there's no question that NAFTA, I think, will come up. Obviously, a huge issue between our two countries. These talks are not going particularly well, as you know. So Trump has to be careful with what he says, because the president's words can move markets and things like that. So there's no question that trade will come up. How specific he wants to get, we'll see. But he has said in the past, and I think we can take this as a clue, he wants trade to be reciprocal and fair. But of course, how you define what's fair and reciprocal, of course, that's the big debate.
That's right. And then we have another comment coming in from John Brain. Will he talk about his plan to give the Dreamers a path to citizenship? Will he talk about his promise to talk about health care as well? Well, we know, John, that he will very likely talk about the immigration framework the White House released last week, which would offer a pathway to citizenship for the Dreamers, but in exchange for a lot of other things, for a big overhaul to the immigration system, the legal immigration system. What do you think the reception of that will be?
Well, you know, it's a
and not to mention the border wall.
Well, to protect he's really up the ante here. He wants now to protect, or at least is offering to give a path to citizenship for nearly 2 million of these Dreamers, but at a very high price. He wants something like $25 billion US, which I believe is about maybe like 40 billion loonie, I think, to build this wall. It's an awful lot of money, and he is being ripped for, of course, he always said, look, these Mexicans are going to pay for the wall. That is not going to happen. Now he wants the American taxpayer to pay for it. So Democrats, I think, have an opportunity to push back on that point. This is going to be a huge, contentious issue. Both sides, I think, are really dug in. I'm not quite sure what's going to happen with it.
And there's another deadline, February 8th, for them to get something done to avoid another possible government shutdown, as we saw
Yep.
just last week. One question I want to ask you about, Paul, is the response from the Democrats. We have several Democratic lawmakers purely boycotting the speech tonight. We have the rebuttal, the official rebuttal from Representative Kennedy, and then we have Bernie Sanders doing his own thing. Maxine Waters will be giving a speech on BET. It doesn't seem to be a particularly unified response from the Democratic Party. They're all not happy, but there's so many branches doing their own thing tonight, it seems.
And what's interesting about that is, you know, there's a presidential election 2 years from now, if you can believe it, and there are going to be a whole bunch of people on the Democratic side who are going to run. Bernie Sanders, perhaps, there's a whole bunch of them, and there's no cohesion within the Democratic Party. And what we're seeing tonight with all these different responses is a reflection of that. So there is no cohesion. Nancy Pelosi and Sanders and Joe Biden and on and on and on. So the fact that people think that Trump is in trouble, I don't know. The Democrats are pretty divided themselves. They have to get together, come up with a candidate. So the problems they're having tonight, I think, are a reflection of that.
Countdown to 2020.
Yep.
We just have a question now from Gref Caesar saying, do you think he'll talk about North Korea? There is some, from Greg Caesar, do you think he'll talk about North Korea? There has been some reporting from CNN today quoting sources that President Trump is expected to address North Korea quite seriously in the speech tonight. And I just wonder what tone do you think he'll strike in those remarks if he does address North Korea?
Well, at the United Nations last September, before the General Assembly, he said that we will totally destroy North Korea, about as bellicose as it gets. And North Korea ratcheted back the rhetoric a little bit, but you never really know. I think Trump's advisors have urged him to kind of, you got to tone it down a little bit. We're talking about nuclear weapons and war, and it's serious stuff, so we'll see. But to talk like that at the UN, if he talks like that again tonight, he wants to be seen as a tough guy. So if he talks about North Korea, he'll say, look, this is the most dangerous problem we face. We have to control them. We think that within a year or two, they have these nuclear weapons. They can easily put them on top of a missile, hit Guam or Hawaii. There was that missile scare in Hawaii just a couple of weeks ago. So I think he could be actually kind of harsh about North Korea.
And I just want to ask you, Paul, just more broadly about States of the Union. There's been so many seminal moments where George W. Bush famously created the axis of evil term. How important is a State of the Union, particularly a president's first State of the Union address?
I'm not sure they're as important as they used to be, because Donald Trump, for example, has a Twitter account where he can reach tens of millions of people on his own, completely unfiltered, whenever he wants. We know who he is, we know how he speaks, we know what's on his mind. In the past, State of the Union is really, or has really been, an event where the president comes out, the whole nation gathers to watch. It's highly anticipated. It's not quite the drama I think that there used to be, again, because we know who we're dealing with. The speech last year was not officially a State of the Union, but for all intents and purposes, it was, because he was here, he was talking to a joint session of the House and the Senate and so forth. So I think there's a little bit less drama tonight, but with Donald Trump, of course, there's always drama, but not quite the drama that there was last year.
Right. We have another comment coming in, and thank you everyone for posting these. I'm not sure that Paul or I will be able to talk about this, but it's about the celebrities who are holding the People's State of the Union, which I believe happened last night, but I don't think either of us often follow celebrity news. I'm sorry, Eddie, I don't think we can really address that, but we can go back to tonight. It really doesn't seem like there's going to be any massive surprises, right? Because presidents use this speech to talk about the accomplishments of the past year and talk about the priorities going forward. And we so often do hear President Trump talk about his accomplishments. Is there anything that you would be surprised if he mentioned?
Well, there's one important thing that I forgot to mention. You know, the president is always saying, you know, how he brags about everything, and that's what presidents do. They boast about their accomplishments, and they tend to embellish, and President Trump is certainly no different. But he has said, look, everything is going great. The White House is a well-oiled machine. Everybody here is happy. I enjoy very high popularity. And yet the White House is branding this as a reset of sorts. Well, if things are going as great as you say, why the need to call it a reset? We do know, of course, that the president's approval ratings aren't nearly as high as he says. If he wants to believe that, that's fine. But if things are going so good, why call it a reset? But it is an opportunity for them just to, again, sort of reframe who he is. And if he comes out and talks in kind of a sober, serious fashion, I don't think that will hurt him.
And if he can try to create a bit of bipartisanship, reach across the aisle, particularly as we move closer to that possible next government shutdown in just over a week.
Well, that's true. I mean, the shutdown that we had was what, only a week or two ago, and here we are another week or two, and there could be another shutdown. It's just amazing.
Move very quickly here in Washington. We have a few more questions coming in. Peter Stewart Smith is wondering if the politicians in attendance will protest in any way. Well, Paul discussed this a little bit in terms of what we might see, but in terms of sort of what we know about protests, we know that there are several lawmakers who are not coming tonight. Many of them are in the Congressional Black Caucus. They're not coming in protest of the president as a result of several things that have happened over the past year. Think about comments after the violence in Charlottesville, in Virginia, for example. So some lawmakers are just purely not coming. Other lawmakers who are coming are bringing dreamers, young people brought to the U.S. illegally as children, to try to keep the pressure on the president to make sure something is done for them as part of immigration reform. We're also going to see other guests who have been critical of the president. The mayor of San Juan, Puerto Rico will be here at the invitation of a New York senator, for example. We're also going to see the wife of an immigrant who was deported a few weeks ago, a 40-year-old who had been in the U.S., I believe, for 30 years. Right. His family is here, and his wife will be here tonight. Right. So there's going to be a lot of people in the audience who are not happy with what they've seen from the Trump administration. That's a pretty powerful, it's a powerful reminder to Donald Trump of these people who are not happy with some of the things he's done.
It's very powerful, and again, I think you'll see kind of two stories tonight. You'll see, again, Republicans and the guests that they have applauding wildly. They support the president. They think the economy is doing quite well. They like the tougher talk on the border, all that stuff. That's about 2/5 of the country, though. The other 3/5 of the country, polling suggests, aren't happy with the president for a variety of reasons. They will not be applauding. The best way to protest is, I don't think boycotting and not showing up is the way. I think sitting there and not applauding and being seen on TV not applauding, I think, is a more powerful signal to send. I think you'll see all of the Democrats in the chamber tonight doing that, just ignoring him as best they can. There was an incident, by the way, during one of the early Obama States of the Union where there was a South Carolina congressman named Joe Wilson who very famously shouted out, "You lie." In the middle of that talk, he was reprimanded by his own party for that. Very rude, very indecent. I don't think we'll see anything like that tonight, but certainly there are a lot of Democrats who are going to be holding their tongue because that's what they think of this president.
And we have another comment, a question coming in from Jeff Reed, and this sort of takes us beyond Washington. He's asking, the world will be watching this one, or he's commenting the world will be watching this one. What will other leaders be looking for, do you think, from this speech, Paul?
Well, I think his talk in Davos last week was quite interesting, and it wasn't quite the typical Trump that we're used to. He sort of dialed back the rhetoric and the bombast, and a lot of people were actually quite surprised at that. I mean, here's this nationalist, this America First guy in the middle of sort of the globalism, talking about, well, America First does not mean America alone. That was a very interesting line, but he's not talking to that audience tonight. He's talking to the American people, so it's going to be a little bit different. So how he's going to thread that needle, talk to his base here while a global audience is watching, that's kind of a tough thing for him to do. He's a bit of a chameleon, though. He may try and play it both ways, but we'll see.
Well, that Davos speech was quite interesting because when he spoke at NATO last year, for example, or even the UN, he lectured other countries, and that certainly, as you say, was not the tone that we heard from him in Davos. We are getting close to wrapping up here, so if you have any last minute questions, please post them on Facebook and YouTube, but we're going to wrap up in a few minutes. Paul, how would you measure this as a successful speech? So what does he have to do for pundits like yourself to think, okay, that was a good speech?
Well, you're going to see a lot of talk tonight about how the president, if it's this teleprompter Trump that we've been talking about, if he sticks to the prompter, if he doesn't screw up, he doesn't go off script and make some kind of a weird remark, I think the pundits will say it was very professional. We saw the president acting like a president, that kind of thing. That would be a win for him. If he doesn't do that, then it won't be. But the thing about Donald Trump is that that expectations are always, at this point, they're a little bit low with him, just because we've seen for the past year who he is, how unstable he is. I'm talking about sort of the Twitter rants and that kind of thing. If he can kind of stick to the high ground tonight, to be professional, act like a president, I think that would be pretty successful for him. And
we should mention, though, I mean, you mentioned the polling, but he still holds on to that group who enjoys the way he communicates on Twitter and enjoys the comments that he makes. So I guess he'll please someone no matter what he does tonight. I think we're going to wrap up now. Thank you so much for watching on Facebook and YouTube. Thank you, Paul, for braving this Washington cold, which I know is not as cold as Canada right now. But thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. And the State of the Union will be broadcast tonight, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Almost done.
So we're just going to chat for a minute here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like, okay. A little chattering.
It's a bit chilly, isn't it?
What?
It is a bit chilly.
It's a bit chilly. I can't believe it.